Bell. He is the National Organizing Manager at the Secular Student Alliance, where he leads the organizing staff and resourcing hundreds of student groups at high school, college, and university campuses. The SSA helps students to create community, define their secular humanist values, and put those values into action. Ryan also serves as a humanist chaplain at the University of Southern California, USC, fight on, and he's the host of the Life After God podcast. Now, after 20 years in a congregational pastoral ministry, Ryan left his church back in 2013, and shortly thereafter he began an exploration of atheism and humanism, and he wrote about his experience at the Year Without God blog. His experience in writing became an international phenomenon and was covered by CNN, the BBC, NPR, the Los Angeles Times, and dozens of podcasts. Since leaving his faith behind, Ryan has been a writer and a speaker on the subjects of religion, humanism, and justice. In 2015, he launched a project called Life After God, which supports individuals going through faith transition and deconversion. Ryan received a Master of Divinity degree from Andrews University and a Doctor of Ministry from Fuller Theological Seminary. He is an adjunct professor, and he has taught subjects ranging from intercultural communication to bioethics. Today, Ryan will be speaking on Atheism is Not Enough. Ladies and gentlemen, Atheists United, please welcome Ryan Bell.
That just comes right out of there, doesn't it? Q&A. It's good to see you. It's good to be back with Atheists United in your pilgrimage around Los Angeles. It's good to track you down here in this relic of the 90s, a mall. I haven't been in I was really tripping out walking over here. I haven't been inside of a mall in, I don't know, over a decade. It was just creepy almost to be like, it feels like a post-apocalyptic, film or something with all the shuttered stores and so forth. But I'm glad they have community rooms. That's really a good thing. So thanks for inviting me. I was here a couple years ago, and it's good to be back. My title today is Atheism is Not Enough, and it's more of a thought experiment for me, and I hope you'll take it that way. I hope you'll kind of think with me about some things that are on my mind. Usually when depending on the kind of talk, I guess, but when I was a pastor, I would often, my sermons would be pretty open-ended and ending with sort of a question for the community, and I hope to kind of do something along those lines today. As most of you know, I was a Christian all of my life. As you just introduced me, for 20 years I was a pastor, but for 20 years before that I was a Christian growing up in the church until I was 41, believing more or less in various different degrees of sincerity, I suppose, the tenets of Christianity. And it was more than a belief system for me, as I've tried to say before. My Christian faith really shaped me. It defined everything about me, from my understanding of good and evil, to my personal ethical choices in my life, to my vocation ultimately. But more importantly than all of that, I guess, is the combination of those things. It really informed my understanding of the big picture of what it meant to be human, what it meant to be a member of the human race, what it meant to be sort of an adult, like an agent in the world, doing what I hoped was good things. Not always, but I was aiming for that. So in 2014, I became an atheist. I left my church in 2013, somewhere along 2014. I went from being a theist to a post-theist. Not all atheists are post-theists. A lot of atheists were never theists to begin with. There's one in the back. Yeah, anybody else never grew up in religion? All right, yeah, that's right. You never grew up with a belief system either. So there's a handful of you, maybe like a quarter of you, didn't have religion in the first place. Really different experience, I'm assuming, it's hard to know because neither of us know what the other one's experience is, but from my experience, it's quite a different understanding of religion and atheism when you haven't been a part of religion. So as a result, my atheism is very Christian. I hope you can understand what I mean by that. I think actually in America, everyone's atheism is rather Christian. Even if you were never Christian. We can think of Christianity as a Jewish heresy, and we can think of atheism, I think, as a Christian heresy. Maybe even specifically a Protestant Christian heresy. The modern atheist movement, of course, grew out of the Enlightenment, out of Christianity, from modern humanism the same way, through the Christian churches, through the Unitarian Church, to what we now think of as modern American humanism. So atheism is a negation. It's something we say no to in terms of Christianity in America. Now that doesn't mean all atheists in America were formerly Christians, that some of them were formerly Jews, some formerly Muslims, some formerly something else. But by and large, atheism is in America a reaction to Christianity. It's a post-Christian movement, and as the United States becomes more and more post-Christian, as we see the rise of the nuns, people who aren't maybe necessarily ready to say that they're atheists, but at least they don't identify with any given religion or any particular denomination, or they don't go to church or any synagogue or anything like that. We see this post-Christian America rising and emerging. Those of us that used to be Christian, our atheism is particularly Christian. It's defined by what we're not anymore. So, as such, atheism in America is more often than not a question of beliefs. The same as Protestant Christianity. Protestant Christianity is a belief-centered faith. Catholic Christianity a little bit less so, more about practice, more about ritual, more about particular movements that you go through. Protestant Christianity really eschewed all of that. They said it doesn't matter how you bow or how you pray, or it just matters that you pray. In fact, you can do it on your own, in your own room if you want to. You don't have to go to the church to pray. You don't have to have a priest intercede between you and God. You can go straight to God yourself. So in that sense, Protestant Christianity was a Catholic heresy. And so Protestant Christianity became very much about what you believe. And the reason that we have so many Christian denominations in America is that the minute you put a line in the sand about what you believe, someone will say, oh, well, no, that's not quite right. Here's another way of looking at that. We think we're right. And when you're trying to describe something that nobody's ever seen before, there's an infinite variety of ways of describing what those systems look like and how you go about being a proper Christian. And so nobody can really agree on what a proper Christian is, and so we have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Christian denominations in America. So atheism is a negative claim about all of that, and about gods in general. And there's a recurring, and by recurring I mean almost daily, it seems, debate about atheism on the internet, in social media, about whether atheism is a definite claim about gods or simply just a lack of beliefs. I tend to fall into the camp of a more stronger version of atheism, where I actually would claim that there is no God. I don't think I lack anything. I don't believe that my atheism is defined by a lack of anything. My atheism is a claim based on the lack of evidence that there's a God. Some would say that atheism isn't a claim at all. They would never refer to their atheism. They, decided that there's no God one day, and they went about their life, right? You probably know lots of these people. I meet them all the time. People who, on campuses, when I'm in my work now especially, I meet people who say, well, yeah, no, I don't believe there's a God. And they are somewhat shocked to discover that there is an atheist movement, so to say, or that atheists gather in groups like this. It just would never have occurred to them that atheists would care enough about their atheism to actually gather together and talk about it. They're just atheists that, mow their lawn on Sundays instead of going to church. And, you know, go to work and make money, go on vacation, and take care of their kids, and do all the things that people do without ever thinking twice, really, about religion at all. Unless, you know, maybe there's a, you know, a prayer at their kid's graduation and they say, well, that doesn't seem right. You know, then they might get involved in some kind of organized effort to keep church and state separate. So in that case, I think atheism maybe isn't so much of a Christian experience for them, and they really are truly just atheists. But in this country, we live under, unfortunately, still a Christian hegemony. So I understand that. I understand why atheists would gather together to do things like this. And, you know, in fact, I work for Secular Student Alliance, in which we organize non-religious kids on campuses. And we're always having this question, this discussion amongst ourselves, like why we do this. Why we organize non-religious students. And the answer is varied, and I won't go into all the reasons why today for the purpose of time. But suffice it to say that even though things are better than they were 100 years ago or 50 years ago, we still live in a country in which power is in the hand of Christians, by and large, and they exercise that power to marginalize and oppress non-Christians, especially LGBTQ people, women, people of color, immigrants, and others who don't fit into their little box, their version of the world. And as long as people in power wield their Christianity to harm other people, I think a resounding no to Christianity is important. At least a resounding no to a certain variety of Christianity that does the kinds of things I was just describing. There are plenty of Christians who would be allies with us in that effort to stop you know, right-wing Christianity from doing the damage that they seems hell-bent on doing. But I've come to a place after a few years of this, to the place where I feel like atheism isn't enough. And maybe this is a self-evident claim, and maybe you all just agree with me and we can nod along together happily. And I don't make any claims that this is a profound realization, just one that I've made recently. At the end of the day, though, for me, atheism is a negation with no content, right? In fact, the minute you try to make a claim that it's something with content, you know, you get a little bit of pushback from atheists. They say, no, there's nothing about it except that we don't believe in God. And I like that. I like that it's clean that way. I like that it's tidy in that sense. There's no other baggage necessarily that goes along with it. I've often said atheism predicts for nothing. And what I mean by that is that it doesn't predict what other kind of person you might be. Atheism doesn't tell you much else about the kind of politics that you might have or the way that you would choose to live your life, whether you prefer to live in the city or the country, or whether you want to send your kids to private school or public school, or whether you are a vegetarian or a carnivore. It doesn't really tell you anything about other aspects of your life. It just tells you the answer to one question. And as it turns out, it's not that difficult of a question to figure out the answer to. And because atheism predicts for nothing, the downside of that is that it leaves open all kinds of different abuses and ideologies that, when lumped together under the umbrella of atheism, can create confusion and dissent. In recent months, we've seen major figures of the atheist community exposed for all sorts of things, like sexual harassment and assault and financial mismanagement. I'm sure that you've been following the stories. I don't want to go into gory detail, but in February, Lawrence Krauss, who's long been known as a serial sexual harasser by many people, was publicly exposed for his misdeeds. The headline in the BuzzFeed article read in bold letters, "The Unbeliever." All right? So his behavior is now under the auspices of being an unbeliever, right? Even though we know that being an unbeliever doesn't make you any more or less likely to be a sexual predator than anybody else, he's known in the media as the unbeliever. In fact, he was in a movie along with a few other unbelievers, the title of which was The Unbelievers, right? He's been a regular at conferences all over the world, advocating for a scientific view of the world, and he was damn good at it, right? Wonderful, wonderful speaker and presenter. But underneath all of that was this dark streak of abuse and predation. Just over a week ago, and it seems like months already, David Silverman, who we all have known probably and loved, was fired from his position at the American Atheist for a variety of issues, including financial conflicts and sexual misconduct. David was probably the most loved and hated personality in the atheist movement. I'm sure he was a personal friend to many of you, as he was to me. I saw him and spoke with him the Saturday before he was placed on administrative leave. He was in my office a month before that. We went out to dinner, a few of us, not long before that in February. And he was one of the first people I spoke to about my desire to explore the atheist community. I met him at Steve Hill's home, and he invited me to be a guest without paying the entrance fee, very graciously, at the Salt Lake City American Atheist Convention, which was, Easter was pretty early that year. It was March, and so you imagine it's my third month in my year without God. Going to the American Atheist Convention in Salt Lake City was, so to say, like jumping in the deep end of the pool. But it was a learning experience, and David was always very gracious to me. But these allegations are very serious. And besides all of this, there's a persistent stream of racism and misogyny in the movement that I've seen and experienced, often sort of hiding behind a positivist and scientific facade. There's usually a veneer of respectability preventing a clear accusation of overt racism, and there's often a degree or two of separation between popular movement leaders and the worst of the toxicity. But there is a disturbing pathway. And on Friday, a very controversial article came out from the Southern Poverty Law Center summarizing the stories of 74 individuals who have described their radicalization narratives. Did some of you see this story? It was a description of radicalization narratives of members of the Right Stuff on Internet Forum. And the Right Stuff Internet Forum is a neo-Nazi forum. And I went there to sort of explore and investigate and discovered that I had to make a profile, a username, and a password. And so I didn't. I decided maybe I should just, I've got enough problems in my life. I don't need to be found out as someone who has a profile on that website. But on that forum, on the Right Stuff blog, there was a couple of posts, according to SPLC, asking folks to describe how they got there, like their stories. Almost like if American Atheists put out a post on a blog that said, hey, atheists, those of you that have become atheists and you were something else before, tell us your story about how you became an atheist. Like, what books did you read and what speakers did you hear? And people would say, oh, wow, I watched, Christopher Hitchens' debates, all of them, I'm not making this up, I didn't do that, but I've talked to people who've literally watched every Christopher Hitchens debate, every Sam Harris debate, every, Richard Dawkins speech, they've read all the books, and that's how they became atheists, right? And so if you ask them, how'd you become an atheist, they would begin to tell you the books they read, the podcasts they listened to, the videos that they saw. Well, something similar happened on this Right Stuff blog where they said, who are the people who helped you develop your neo-Nazi viewpoints that you have today? And a minority, and I want to emphasize, a very small minority of them mentioned Sam Harris and his interview with Charles Murray. So all of this has got everybody really kind of riled up. SPLC discovered that skeptics, and they call it skeptics, among them Sam Harris, was a gateway drug for some of their racist and fascist views. Which I want to be clear, does not mean that Sam Harris is a fascist. It doesn't mean that he's an overt racist himself. And he has reacted on Twitter with predictable hostility to the suggestion that he has anything to do with anyone's right-wing radicalization. But if I was Sam Harris, I would be incredibly disturbed by this. Not disturbed in the way, well, I'd probably be disturbed in a variety of ways. One of which might be the impulse to defend myself. But the other might be the impulse to examine myself and to think about the kinds of influences and the kinds of people that I'm associating with. It's interesting because I was trying to remember who said this, and maybe you can help me remember, because I want to be careful about associations, because we all have associations that we don't want to be responsible for everything our associates think and believe. But there's a gray area there, right? It may have been Richard Dawkins, or perhaps it was Sam Harris, who, in attempting to discount progressive Christians, said that progressive Christians are also part of the problem because they give legitimacy, a kind of legitimacy to Christianity in general. And so the progressive Christians are not part of the solution because they're still giving cover to Christianity in general. Do you understand the argument that is? Yeah.
That page in End of Faith is bookmarked in my copy.
Oh yeah, so that's Sam Harris, right? So you know, somebody would say to Sam, like, okay, well, what about these progressive Christians? We can be allies with them. They're doing good work, right, along the same kind of lines that we are. And his argument is that maybe so, and to a certain degree, but they're also giving cover to Christianity and the worst abuses within Christianity. And I think the worst that could be said about what Sam's doing, and I don't mean to pick on Sam in particular, but it's an example, is that his approach to these subjects gives cover to the worst aspects of the alt-right movement. Doesn't mean that Sam's alt-right, doesn't mean that he has any sympathies with the alt-right. It just means that for me at least, it's very important for me to be conscious of who and what I'm platforming and putting forward, especially without a robust pushback and multiple viewpoints being expressed. My point in all of this is not to needlessly demonize people. You know, honestly, and I've been working on an article called No More Mr. Nice Guy, because I think one of the pathologies that I acquired as a Christian and as a Christian leader was to be, I felt it was my job to be nice. And so I really don't like being in conflict at all. It affects my personal relationships. I just don't like conflict. So I'm not here to just sort of stoke controversy. I've never given any kind of public talk like this. But things are a little frightening at the moment in the world, from my perspective. And inasmuch as atheism isn't a positive life philosophy, it's a negation, as we were saying before, an important negation, but really nothing more. When the official news first broke about Lawrence Krauss, and I used the expression online, atheist movement, there was a sizable pushback declaring there is no atheist movement. Atheists don't have leaders, it's simply a denial of theism. And yet here we are, sitting together today, and the name of this organization is Atheists United. Uniting atheists sounds something like a movement or a campaign of some kind to me. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, I'm just saying it's a thing, right? I've also described myself, probably much more often than being an atheist, I describe myself as a humanist, and humanism strives to be a positive life stance. Even modern humanism has traditionally defined itself in negation. I suppose it's unavoidable, and as we said before, humanism is a Christian development. Just as the Unitarian Church evolved to be post-theist, humanism grows out of that. And the first Humanist Manifesto in 1933 predates the American Humanist Association by 8 years. It specifically describes itself in relationship to religion and to Christianity. It's interesting, the third, it's really fun to do this. In fact, I want to do a deep dive on the differences between the three Humanist Manifestos. The third Humanist Manifesto, the current one, makes no reference at all to religion or of any kind. It talks. It's all expressed in positive terms. What they do stand for and what they do believe, as opposed to what they don't stand for and don't believe. And there are other traditions in saying that atheism is not enough. And this is kind of where I want to begin to conclude with some suggestions and questions. Because the thing that's on my mind is that saying atheism is not enough is not to say that atheism is bad or wrong in any way. Of course it isn't. I'm an atheist. It's just not enough, right? There needs to be something else that organizes us. And some of you, I know, are involved in those movements to organize yourselves in ways that go beyond simply the negation of atheism to the positive expression of what it means to be a human in the world in the best possible way. my Christianity as my beliefs, and I don't know that if I've ever really described this successfully, and I don't know that I will right now either, but as my beliefs began to wane as a Christian, for me, my Christianity became more about my practice, about what I did with my life, the kind of person that I was, and became more about ethics, which I think is a distinctly Jewish thing to do, which is why I think Judaism has a much easier time with atheism, and why there's for a very long time been humanistic Judaism.
Contradiction.
Perhaps so. My first encounter when I started my Year Without God blog, my first personal conversation was with a rabbi friend of mine who, with a big smile on his face, said, "Oh, over half of my synagogue are atheists. It's not a big deal. We're happy for you. You're welcome at our synagogue anytime." Of course, being Jewish is a whole big to-do, and I wasn't prepared to become Jewish. And I don't really feel like I have much of a religious impulse anymore. But the point I'm trying to make is that I began to, as my belief system began to decline in terms of my ability to believe things that I was supposed to believe, my commitment to ethics and action increased. To the end, at the very end, I never really got into debates with Christian apologists. I was not a very good counter-apologist, and I'm still not a very good counter-apologist, because I just don't like apologetics at all, of any kind. I don't enjoy it. I'll do it if I have to, but I don't like arguing with people about their beliefs. It's just not what makes me happy. Other people would happily go pick a fight with someone about really almost any topic, and that's great too. I mean, that's something that you enjoy doing. But I never got into debates with people about my beliefs because I simply relativized them in my Christianity. I said, well, it doesn't. There's plenty of members of my congregation who don't believe all sorts of things. In fact, we had atheists in my congregation. We had Buddhists in my congregation. The Buddhist, a good friend of mine who's probably, haven't talked to him in ages, probably still a Buddhist, was a non-theistic Buddhist. Didn't bother him at all that I became an atheist. He didn't believe in gods either. So my orientation is towards the good. And one of the things I used to say to my congregation was, do you want to be right or do you want to be good? Now, ideally, we should be both as best we can, good and right. But I found in my Christian experience that Christians, evangelicals in particular, especially right-wing Christians, would rather be right than good. They would rather prove something and try to make themselves appear right than to be good people. Yeah. And what I've discovered is that this is an affliction that affects humans, not just Christians. There are people who would rather be right than good, who are atheists as well. They'd rather win an argument online than be a good person. And I'm the kind of person, not always, I get sucked into arguments online. If you follow me on Facebook, you know I occasionally get sucked into an argument. Occasionally I'll start an argument. But I'd rather be good and wrong about something. I'd rather concede the point and be a good person than insist on my way and be a shitty person, if that makes any sense. And I feel like there needs to be some kind of movement beyond, in addition to our atheism. And so I've been exploring that. I've made a friend with a professor. I don't know if any of you know, and you should invite him to come down here and talk to you. Joe Blankholm. Do you know Joe Blankholm from Santa Barbara? He's a professor, assistant professor of religion at University of California, Santa Barbara. You may know that University of California, Santa Barbara has a very strong religion program, which is different than theology, and their religion is simply just the academic study of religion. And Joe is an atheist and studies secularism professionally, young man, articulate. He'd be a great speaker. So he and I have been chatting, and he's got a couple of articles that have recently come out, and he's helping me think about how our life stance, our philosophy can be rooted in something that's more than just the negation of Christianity. So I started thinking of it like a tree. So if atheism, modern American atheism and humanism, is kind of almost like a branch out here off of Christianity, what if there was a way to connect our non-belief in gods to something deeper, something older, something that goes back a bit further? Of course, Massimo Pigliucci has talked a lot about Stoicism, which predates Judaism by about 1,000 years, a non-theistic belief system in the ancient world. Epicureanism is older than Christianity, came up during a period of time when Judaism was kind of also on the rocks, having a difficult time pre-Christianity. There are ancient traditions full of wisdom about how to live the good life that aren't part of Christianity. And this is something I was never taught. Of course, my Christian upbringing, there was no motivation for me to learn any of that, right? So I offer that to you as a suggestion. What's on my mind today, I guess, is a deep disappointment with what I've found on this side of Christianity. And that's my fault as much as it's anybody's fault. It's been hard for me to realize that people aren't more rational just because they figured out there's no God. It doesn't mean that they're more compassionate. It doesn't mean that they're more just. It just means they've figured out the answer to one question, which is that there's no gods. And so I want to end with a question for you and for me. If this is Atheists United, then I just would humbly ask, united for what? Atheists United for, and you can fill in the blank with all kinds of good things. And you can fill in the blank with all kinds of really shitty things, right? Okay. That happens too, right? People can do that. Not here. And so that's I guess that's what's on my mind today. It's something I've been wrestling with a lot. It's a question that I have, an ongoing question for me, post-theology, post-God, post-religion. Where do I find a source for an intellectual source, a moral source, for the kind of person that I think, and this is just my opinion, I suppose, that will make this world a more hospitable and generous place on a more consistent basis. Thank you. And now you will grill me, I understand. Is that right? Do we go straight into questions?
Yes.
Yeah, questions.
Questions and responses, I like to call it. No answers, yes.
I thought you said there were 3 kinds of humanism?
Well, not kinds. There's been 3 manifestos. So 3 sort of statements of not belief, I suppose, but like sort of what does humanism mean? The first one is in 1933, and then so it's really fun to think of these in historical terms. So imagine 1933, post-Depression, but pre-war, pre-World War II, and so there's a sense of optimism about it, a sense that religion may be fading away and we're moving into this new world. And then in the late 40s, I think 47 or 48, the second Humanist Manifesto was written. And then in the 70s, I want to say, the third Humanist Manifesto. And they're all revisions of the one before, sort of. They're all listed on the American Humanist Association's website. You can look at them. It's kind of fun to print them out and like read them closely with a highlighter and stuff to see kind of what the priorities are, what the issues are. Early humanism in America was much more, they thought of themselves as a religion, one of the religions, and you can see why, because they emerged out of the Unitarian Church, which emerged out of Protestant Christianity as a non-theistic, or at least open to non-theism. And so early American humanism was thought of itself as an alternative religion. And today, the American Humanist Association, it draws a much bigger line between what they do and religion. Though, they want to be recognized by the law as a religion, and do that via a separate nonprofit called the Humanist Society, which was part of the Quakers originally. The Quakers founded the American Humanist Society, also open to non-theism, and because they are recognized as a religion, when you get certified as a celebrant to do weddings and so forth, mainly just weddings, because anybody can do a funeral, you are authorized in all 50 states. Unlike CFI, which refuses to associate with religion at all, which is fine, there's nothing wrong with that, but it means that if you're certified as a celebrant with CFI, there are certain states that you can't do weddings in because they don't recognize non-religious celebrants. That's a lot, that's way more than what you asked.
But that's
You
good to
said
know.
what humanism is to you, because you described yourself as a humanist.
Right.
If you said what it is to you,
I guess I didn't.
I missed it.
Yeah, good point. So yeah, to me it's and again my hesitation here is a interesting point as well. It's a naturalistic, humanistic. I'm using the word naturalistic, materialistic philosophy that prioritizes human agency. I would say would be the short way. So humans are the ones that are responsible for the way the world is, not God, not God's, not supernatural. So it's a non-supernatural, reason and evidence-based approach to ethics, responsibility. Anybody want to add to that?
The standard phrase that we were taught in celebrant training is that humanism is a positive philosophy of life without supernaturalism that promotes an ethical and responsible approach to life.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah.
sounds good.
But it keeps
But
the
that's
door open
also
for
atheist.
agnosticism, that's the...
Yeah, I think it does. It probably keeps the door open, and I think that there's, but it has more to do with how people live and the philosophy that they use to guide their life forward, rather than the backward-looking view of what you don't believe. I think that's the thing. Yeah. Oh, Bobby, and then we'll come up here.
Yeah. Are you familiar with Gora and the concept of positive atheism?
What's the word you said first?
Gora.
Gora.
Gora. He
No.
was a lieutenant of Gandhi's.
Oh. Okay.
And to make it short and
Yeah.
oversimplified, he simply believed that atheism is a positive value, and it's responsible for freedom. He often said the only imperative is honesty. And
there are certain, there are definitely values that lead a person to atheism, like curiosity, and sort of the commitment to truth and knowledge that certainly would create a positive atheism.
it was Gora's idea that we are naturally kind, we are naturally egalitarian, and that he originally said it was religion that took us away from those things, only religion. He changed his mind, but...
See, I would say, as a Christian, I thought we were naturally good, sort of corrupted by sin, but naturally good. Now that I'm an atheist, I would say, no, people are
all kind.
Yeah, people are people. Like, I don't know what to say. Yes, you were next, I think.
Yeah, well, I come from a totally different experience because I came an atheist in another country. So, and I think that atheist is a positive thinking. I also think that the religion is the negative, because religion is what put us hundreds of years behind in science and logic.
Sure.
So, with a secular mind, you really can advance in society. But that doesn't mean that all the atheists are good people.
Right.
Are bad and good.
Right.
So in my original country, when I used to say that I was an atheist, no one cares, even that it was a mainly Catholic country. It was worse to say that I was a Jew. They prefer I was an atheist than a Jew.
Right.
But when I came to this country, I say that I was an atheist, or you're a communist. I came 40 years ago, yes.
Now you couldn't find a single communist atheist
Well,
today in America.
But they
Maybe one or two.
related totally, very close-minded. So, so I don't see that atheists come from as a development of a contradiction with a specific religion. Like you say, atheism was in existence before any of those religions. Was in the ancient world. Was,
Sure.
And because I come from another country, I knew that.
Yeah. What is your country of origin?
Argentina.
Argentina. Interesting.
And
Yeah, and there was a Jewish diaspora to Argentina.
oh,
Remember?
it's
Yeah,
a
huge.
large,
Yeah.
yeah. And
Right.
I'm sorry?
Fleeing judgment,
Let me
fleeing
tell
justice.
you, I always get upset with that. Because in Argentina, the Nazis pay Perón in gold to come. In United States pay the Nazis to come to United States. Okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so be careful.
Yeah, I know.
And
So my only point is not that atheism is bad. It's just that it's
You
to me
have-
it's neutral. It's a
a-
neutral thing.
It's not a neutral, it's a positive thinking.
Well, I'm glad that's your experience.
I also talk with my granddaughter regarding this. She's an atheist, but I told her always the positive point to be an atheist, to be open-minded, to be have your own opinion. Don't let that someone, even I thought, maybe I'm wrong, you have to think for yourself. So
Yeah.
I think religion is totally negative.
Yeah, and I don't think that there's anything, I mean, I'm an atheist, so I think it's a positive part of my life. I'm happy to be here today versus where I was 5 years ago. I think that's progress for me, to move from being a Christian to being, after that, an atheist. And I guess all I'm saying is, I'm not satisfied yet. Like, I think there's more, right? There's something else that's guiding us towards a positive sort of vision for what it means to be human.
But you will have bad and good people in
Sure.
anything.
True.
So we are not pure.
Agreed. Oh my. Let me go to the gentleman in the back, and then we'll sort of move this across this way.
I'm a little bit uncomfortable with the standpoint that atheism is an empty word or an empty philosophy for a couple of reasons. One reason is that it's a slur that's used by fundamentalists, especially. They take comfort in the idea that atheism is not really a philosophy, so they don't need to be worried about it. But more important, what atheism really is, it's a label or a class. It's a class of philosophies or life standpoints, stances, or whatever your world views, whatever you want to call it. Nobody is an atheist only and nothing else, right? So, but it's also not empty, I don't think, completely, because if somebody says that there's an atheist, they are atheist, that rules out a whole lot of things that we can be pretty sure that they don't believe in. I don't think there are any atheists that are also young Earth creationists, right? I mean, that just doesn't make any sense. And of course, people don't always make sense in their beliefs, or most people don't make completely sense, right? But still, atheist is not empty because it limits this group or class of philosophies that this person is likely to embrace.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly what it is. It's a delimiting factor that rules out some things. And in that sense, it's, as I said, progress in the right direction. Yeah.
Can I, short question. You said that you recently started this thought process on just atheism is not enough. What exactly pushed you towards that? Is it because you're getting dissatisfied with enough of activity from the movement? Because from point of view of this organization, we naturally kind of expel negativity out of the group. It's not welcome here because it becomes like a haven for people who come because they're surrounded by too much religion. They come here and then they suddenly discover, yes, atheism is not the only thing that I am. Right. I'm also a lot of things. But it naturally kind of happened that this group doesn't have any pro-Nazis or pro anything, right? So
how inspiring! That's fantastic.
So when you decided to start this thought process, is it because like you don't see enough like movement from atheists, so we just don't do enough?
No, it's not so much that. I mean, I'm two things, and I think some of the recent scandals have sort of pushed me even further to the point where, like, we all have to decide where we invest our time. There's not enough time for everything. Also, working for Secular Student Alliance, one of the things that we talk about and that we debate a lot is what we sometimes call secular values. And there are among us people who would say there's no such thing as secular values. Secular values are whatever values secular people have. And secular people are committed to either the separation of church and state, or a non-religious public square, or however you want to describe that. But then everything else fits within that. So to say secular values, you could be a white supremacist and that's your secular value. And that's not what we mean, obviously, when someone says the term secular values. That's hopefully not the first thing that comes to your mind. But so we have this internal debate all the time in our organizations that are value-based organizations. Is the expression secular values a meaningful expression? Does that say anything about, and there's two sides. I've heard people argue passionately that yes, secular values mean, just what the gentleman said a minute ago, it's pro-science, it's anti-superstition, it's anti the sort of junk science, UFOs, you know, all that kind of stuff that would, I think, reasonably fall under a secular values. But when we're talking about character development, raising kids, what kind of kids would you like your kids to grow up to be? Which is a concern that I have. I mean, I have teenagers, so it's probably too late. Whatever they are already. You know, I've missed, whatever I've done is the best I can do, maybe for now. But when you start thinking in terms of like sort of Aristotle's kind of notion of pass-onable traits, the qualities that make for the good life that you would like to pass on to the next generation, that would form not just a good life in the sense of being good, but actually a really enjoyable life, a life that you would look back on your deathbed and say, it's been great, I really enjoyed it, and I've contributed something, and all those things. Where do we find those? Where do we root those? And maybe the answer is nowhere. Maybe we just make them up, right? But again, this is where we get pushback from Christians saying, well, then it's just your opinion that being generous is a good thing, right? And I've often said to people, yeah, I mean, it is my opinion, buttressed by thousands and thousands of years of evidence that it works out to the betterment of society. But yes, if that's what you mean by my opinion, then sure. But does it go all the way to the root, you know, or can I ground that notion of generosity in an ontological sense? Again, maybe you can, maybe you can't. There are moral realists who say you can. They say that there are moral facts, that their morality can be factual the way that, you know, atoms and molecules can be factual. I'm dubious. I'm more of the social constructionist mindset, that our values are the things that have worked out this way out of, you know, millennia of experimentation. So I guess the answer to your brief question, which I've turned into now a long answer, is that I started down this path almost immediately having leaving Christianity, because Christianity gave me, rightly or wrongly, a grounding, a basis for my beliefs, my moral convictions. I happened to do the best I could. I think I crafted a very humanistic set of values out of Christianity. Christianity is the thing that taught me to be concerned about justice. It's the thing that taught me to be concerned about poverty. It's the thing that taught me to be concerned about peace versus violence. I learned all that from Christianity. Those are things that I learned from my faith. When I found out that, you know, I didn't have any evidence for believing in a deity, you know, it didn't change any of that other stuff. I still believed in and had those same values. It's just the question became, where do those values come from? And can they be called secular values? Do they need to be called humanistic values? What is humanism? Did we just make that up too? Yeah.
Do you think it's necessary to have an ideology to follow? Because I grew up obviously without religion in the Soviet Union, and atheism was woven into the country's ideological kind of, you know, system. And
She hasn't learned to be good yet.
hey, so I'm just saying, like,
no, I don't. Yeah, ideology is a dangerous thing too, in a way.
Do we need to have that?
Maybe
do we
not.
need to develop a book where would say, like, oh, atheists believe in such and such? Because we don't have a claim to that, like you said. They can claim that all of that goodness is written in this tiny book. Follow that. We don't have that. Do we need that?
No.
I don't think we need that for sure. I do think we naturally think in narratives, though. We naturally think in systems. So we want to kind of, I mean, at least my brain, yours may be different. My brain wants to know, like, actually, this is funny to think about, because, like, I have quite a few close friends who, they don't worry about it at all. They don't worry about any of this crap. They just live their life, and they're happy, and they have a glass of wine at night, they go to bed, they get up in the morning, they go to work, and they just have a nice life. I'm, like, just constantly perplexed about, you know, the world and the state of it and my role in it and all those things. So my mind works in a philosophical way. I think we want, some of us have this natural desire or impulse or conviction or sort of pushing to figure out how the system works, you know? For instance, the Enlightenment, there was a lot of just really, really quickly, a lot of really beautiful and wonderful things that came out of the Enlightenment, you know, all this progress, and then there was the Holocaust, right? And then and this was a key moment in the history of philosophy when everybody went, holy shit, how did we get from there to this? And now what do we do, right? So that whole kind of thinking about, we thought we were on this trajectory towards just going towards the good, and we hit this brick wall. Why did we hit this brick wall? How did we get there? What do we do about it? So those are the kinds of things that I think make me think this way. And I don't think we need a hard and fast ideology, but I do think it helps to know kind of where our beliefs come from.
Have you ever thought about the economic situation and development of the world per se? Like, we have more free time, and economically we are kind of more capable of investing more time into goodness and instead of fighting for survival.
Yeah.
You think that would be big?
Yeah, and I even gave a talk at Sunday Assembly in San Diego a while back about how to experience the good life is, in a way, a privilege of people who have time to experience the good life and money. You know, it's like, anyway, let me move across to, I need the gentleman in blue.
Madeline Murray O'Hare was called the most hated woman in America. All public opinion polls show that atheists rank below used car salespeople, and the last person who could possibly be elected to anything would be an atheist. We are the assaulted class, if you will. We are completely surrounded with the imprint of religiosity, as you well know. So we are the ones who are prejudiced against. We are you're saying that atheism is not enough, I think was the title of what you were saying. But we have to fight back with how we are being surrounded by all these impulses. What jumps to my mind is a couple of people I've met in their 70s and 80s, born and raised in Poland. And when we talk about the Jewish experience in Poland, they were not Jewish, they were not of Judaic faith. In fact, they had many of the typical symbolists that you hear about the Jews. Everything, the banks and the movies, etc., and they have these deep-seated prejudice against Jews in general, but they don't hate them. And my question to you really comes to the difference between prejudice and hate. If they called Madeline Murray the most hated person, and we're surviving under prejudice in this society. Does the prejudice translate to hate either all the time, some of the time, and how do we fight on that?
Yeah, no, it's a really important point, and I'll just go back to Secular Student Alliance for a minute. We have chapters all over the country, from coast to coast, from north to south, and in the South and in the Midwest, we see this a lot more. That school administrators will, if not outright try to decline to allow them to form a Secular Student Alliance, they will at least make it really difficult for them. Starting with, oh yeah, no, we had a club like that once, it didn't really work out. I had one woman, and young people are, deferential to authority for the most part. They're just getting out of their parents' homes, they're on their own for the first time. They're probably not always the people that are gonna stand up to a school administrator and say, you have to let me do this. So they'll come back to us and say, oh yeah, no, they said that. They said that we couldn't have a club there. And we'll be like, oh, but you can. So we do get that kind of prejudice against atheists simply for their atheism. And I think one of the most interesting and fun parts of Secular Student Alliance is watching our students break down that prejudice. Simply like just the other day, one of the signature events of the Secular Student Alliance, I think an event that the Secular Student Alliance founded, is Ask an Atheist Day. And we had it once a year. Now, in a fairly recent time, we do it twice a year, once each semester. And it's exactly what it sounds like, and I'm sure you all have heard of it and participated maybe on your social media, did something with it. And it's just an opportunity to say, look, no gotcha thing here, just ask me anything. And of course, usually it's like, Star Wars or Star Trek. My first question when I posted on social media was the Stones or the Beatles, and I was like, oh boy, here we go. I'm really gonna get in trouble. I went with Stones. Oh, no. Yeah, although I know the Beatles way better. Yeah, just in terms, anyway, I don't get into that. So I do think that there is a prejudice. I think that there, and again, this might be a hot button word here, but the notion of intersectionality tells us that people have overlapping prejudices applied to them. So some people have half a dozen prejudices based on who they are. Some have one, some have two, whatever. And so being prejudiced against, I've never felt that living in California. Most of the time when I tell people I used to be pastor and I'm an atheist, and they look at me like, oh wow, that took you 40 years? So they're...
What took you so long?
Yeah, right. So I've never experienced that prejudice. So when people tell me that atheists are the most hated people in the country, I'm just like, gosh, I don't know if I live in the same country as that. I've never had that experience. But where it does exist, it's important to push back against it for sure. Yeah, in the back.
You posed a question, and kind of left it rhetorically for us to answer. So I'd like you to kind of comment on it. You said, okay, we here are atheists united. What are we united for? Right? So what would be, not a finished answer, but kind of your takes?
Yeah, I kind of like to think of myself as an atheist working for humanism. I think the two are not, sometimes they're pitted against each other. Like, are you an atheist or a humanist? And I'll tell people, like, I'm a humanist, and Silverman, for whatever it's worth, would always, and we would laugh and hug it out at the end, but he would always give me shit about saying I was a humanist. You have to be an atheist, and I would go, I'm that too. These aren't mutually exclusive things. So I would think atheism organized for a better world.
How would that be different from humanism?
I don't think it is.
Okay, so then so atheism then, having no substance of its own per se, is just going to kind of conflate into humanism at some point.
I mean, there's a different emphasis. I mean, you can see that in Atheists Unite. American Atheist Organization versus AHA, American Humanist Association. And you can say, we're all friends. We talk to each other all the time. We communicate back and forth. We organize ourselves on certain projects. This fall, there's going to be a secular voter project that pieces of CFI and AHA and AA and all of us are working together on a project to say secular people vote, and you have to pay attention to us as a voting bloc. Right. So we do that, but AHA and AA have different emphases, and I don't think that one is right and one is wrong. I just think there's a difference in emphasis.
Okay, but eventually, I guess once the substance of kind of a set of secular values and of an identity kind of emerges. All of the humanist organizations are larger and growing as compared to atheist organizations, as far as I can tell. Sunday Alliance, Sunday Assembly, right? Exploded. We've been here for 30 years. Sunday Assembly nationwide. Like, you look at the membership numbers, you look at the budget numbers, et cetera, et cetera. All of the secular, emphasis and humanist emphasis organizations are larger and continue to grow, and atheists getting
exactly. I think that's because once you're an atheist, you've answered the question. Like, you've answered the one question, and then I think there are a set of corollary questions that are very close in a circle right outside of the atheist question, which is the science questions mostly, right, and the legal questions around separation of church and state. To me, the closest value-related issues around atheism itself are secularism, which is, in my view, the separation of church and state and those types of things, and then the, what did I just say? Oh, the science-related questions, right? Because that's how people often find their way into atheism, is through science, and there's a huge sort of a problem in Christianity and religion with science. So I think once you sort of do that, the moral questions or the questions around ethics don't naturally flow out of that. So, but that doesn't mean that atheist groups can't be humanist groups too. In fact, that's kind of my point, as I think that Secular Student Alliance it's not the Humanist Student Alliance. I mean, if I were founding the organization today and I was the founder, I might be tempted to call it the Humanist Student Alliance, but that's not what it is. It's the Secular Student Alliance. And one advantage of being the Secular Student Alliance is that it's a bigger umbrella. We have advisors, professors on campuses that are the liaison to the university, who are Christian humanists, who believe in pluralism and want the Secular Student Alliance to thrive at that school, but they themselves are not atheists. So it's secularism, the secular umbrella cast broadly includes really anyone who believes in pluralism and a separation of church and state.
And yet there are lots of humanists who would not say that they are atheists.
Is that right?
That's right, yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, there are explicitly Christian humanists and there are explicitly Jewish, although being Jewish is different than being Christian in some really important ways.
Religion is a religion is a religion. They have to get off that.
Wow. Yes, sir.
When I first raised my hand, I had about 6 questions in my head, and everybody asked.
And now you have 20. Can someone toss me a bottle of water? I couldn't find it earlier.
And before I finish my question, when Ryan finishes his talk, can I ask everybody to temporarily, just for 10 seconds, move to seats in the front so I can take a picture for the newsletter that looks like doesn't have all these empty seats in front. But anyways, so let me put it this way. I think we know from psychology that action, human action, really comes from emotion. A person who would be totally emotionally flat, who feels nothing strongly, is not likely to be a great man of action, a great person of action. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Likely to be a psychopath.
Yeah, okay, but you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So, when you look, for instance, at the evangelical Christians in the mega churches, what's his name? Billy Graham. Billy Graham recently died, and he would fill these huge 60,000 person soccer stadiums all over the world. And even recently, some of these preachers, some of these preachers, some of them become famous within 20 years. They build up it. And I've talked to people, I've been in discussion groups with believers and gone to the sites of their churches and all that. And you realize it's really, everything comes from emotion. These people are like children. They have this, the big daddy in the sky cares for me.
Have you guys been seeing Wild Wild Country?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, like that first, I've only seen the first episode, but it is like this. It's this I just felt, oh,
Yeah.
I came around the guru and I was just
Right.
overwhelmed. Tears started pouring down my face. And I'm looking at that going, what is that? It's so weird.
Well, among the more educated people, it is possible to feel emotion with regard to knowledge and science. I'm sure
Absolutely.
Einstein was passionate about science. But when you get to, actually, you probably heard about this a few years ago. For a couple of years in Texas, the state school board was taken over by evangelical Christians. And they put into the new rules that they were able to pass that critical thinking was wrong and should never be taught in school. It's true, I'm not making it up, because it encouraged students to question the authority of parents and teachers and authorities.
Ultimately God.
Right, exactly. So to boil down my question basically is, how can atheists, not just, well, maybe also humans, you can answer it any way you prefer, but how can atheists, is there some kind of thing where we can figure out a way to motivate people, to get them at an emotional level, to not give up their rationality, but somehow, be able to do what the missionaries for centuries were able to do, and what these TV preachers and some of these other people, to just grab people by to just get to the part of which is a human and feels that leads us to action and success.
I think the new Cosmos reboot was had a little bit of that.
I never heard of New Cosmos reboot.
The Neil deGrasse Tyson version. So, and I think even actually Carl Sagan, Richard Feynman, Carl Sagan, these folks were very much about connecting. Even Dawkins, in his books, talks a lot about sort of the sense of wonder and awe of science. I think that's a...
Yeah, but Dawkins is an IQ of 160. See, the people, you can grab people like him and Einstein by the intellect.
Right.
But this has been proven.
I think to say, and again, Sunday Assembly is not focused on religious ideology one way or the other, but they are employing an emotional component that is about sharing your life with someone, to asking someone how their week was, and actually hearing what they have to say to you, and becoming a friend of that person. The Secular Student Alliance at USC, where I'm the humanist chaplain, those students, they care about each other. I mean, those students are connected. There was a death, I don't know if you heard, a death at USC. Young student committed suicide about a week and a half ago. And one of our members was pretty close to her. And it rocked that group. And they just pulled together and supported each other. I think this is congregational atheism. I mean, that's not so far from what you're doing right here. I mean, you're gathered. You probably would not prefer the term congregation, but congregational humanism, like Oasis, Sunday Assembly, the ethical societies, even some of the meetups that happen around the country. Someone was telling me, oh, Joe, the guy I was referring to in Santa Barbara, was in one of his papers said over 1,500 meetups, atheist and secular meetups around the country. There's a lot of it. There is an emotional component to that. There's a fine line between that and emotional manipulation, and I think what Christianity gets into is manipulating people with their emotions. And I think it takes a high level of ethical responsibility to kind of manage that, because you do want to touch people. I mean, what do comedians do? Comedians, they say something relatable and they make you laugh, and pretty soon you're just right there with them. And I think Sanderson is a comedian. I mean, he connects with people at that visceral level and then can use that to inspire them. People want to be inspired as well. And I think that's an emotional capacity. So I think you're right. I think we do need to do that. We do need to get out of our heads a little bit and not be so afraid of our, we would say hearts. Not a very scientific expression, but our emotions, Yep. You've been waiting for quite a while. Let me come back here and then up here. And
yeah, like he was saying, my questions have
evolved.
Have been answered and stopped and all that sort of thing. But I think back to your original point of some sort of basis for morality, and I think the Darwin's theory of evolution was so scientific and so physical. I think if we had the same kind of book for the theory of evolution of morality, a scientific, sociological approach that uses observing the scientific method of observation of human history to see how morality, how ethics, how interaction developed over time, and where we are now.
There are some efforts
where we
at that.
could be going.
Yeah.
And it sort of relates to what Guy is talking about too, because scientists really tend to shy away from emotion and from these questions about human interaction. They want physical, specific things they can look at. If they start looking at these heady ideas of morality as an evolutionary thing, it might give us a book, something that we can all agree on and have a shared experience with, and say, oh yeah, that's right, I've experienced that. In interactions with individuals, we've moral results occurred, and it's an observable thing. It's not as easily scientifically proven because you don't have physical evidence of it, but you have sociological evidence and you have historical evidence.
Yeah.
And so that would be a very useful, I think,
I'm so sorry, guys, to
place to
interrupt
start.
you. Can we
Last question.
It looks like we're expressing our opinions now. I think this is the time to move this discussion.
All right. Okay. Look, let's give Ryan a chance. If you've already had a question, put your hands down. People that haven't had a chance to ask a question, let's give them a chance. But please ask a quick question and give Ryan a chance then to speak as whatever he wants to say. But quick with the questions. We'll go around. Anybody that's got one, if you haven't had a chance to ask a question yet.
And the pizza's getting cold, so we want to. I'll hurry up.
Wrap it up.
We go here, and then we go in the back and up here.
This will be a quick question. So we have Carrier, we have Krauss, and now we have Silverman, and this is really hard, and more are going to come. And some of them we knew were going to happen, and it's going to happen again. What would you suggest that individuals and groups do to proactively say, we have to stand behind victims, this is not acceptable, this is what we stand for?
Yeah, there's a couple of things, and I'll try to make this quick. One thing is, I think organizations can do better, and I start with Secular Student Alliance, at being super clear about what's consent, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, what the consequences will be. So, for instance, we're going to have a gender violence prevention person at SSA this summer. We're going to do it during the first opening presentation. We're going to talk about consent. Sometimes I think some people they figure they know what consent is, and then you find out later they don't quite understand what consent is. So, really educating our members, if you're responsible for a group, educating our members, even though it seems pedantic maybe, like, yes means yes, no means no. I mean, you just feel like you're talking to children sometimes, but we need that reminder perhaps. And then to be clear and to have a policy in place about how, if something's reported to you, how you're going to handle that report, what you're going to do with it, what the next steps will be, and what ultimately the consequences will be for people who can't seem to manage the boundaries between themselves and other people. And then, I think the standard of evidence that as a scientifically minded group of people, atheists and secular people, the standard of evidence that some people have in mind when they hear about things is either a legal standard of evidence, like a court of law, or a scientific kind of like DNA evidence or something like that. And of course, cases of violence between individuals, especially sexual violence, often don't have physical evidence associated with them, or that physical evidence has long since gone away because people are afraid, there's power. Sexual violence is about power, it's not about sex, really. And so the power dynamic makes it even harder for people to actually speak their truth, and especially when other issues like employment and professional relationships are all tied up with it. So I think starting with the presumption that the shame and the harassment that goes along with finally a woman, I'm going to say a woman because 90+% of these cases are males against women. The women, the situation in which a woman would make a false accusation of sexual assault for her own advancement is like a unicorn.
Right.
Like, that doesn't happen because when they make an accusation of sexual assault, they get harassed and sort of punished in the social sense. So it's not an advantage for a woman to make up a claim like that in general. It has happened, and it seems like one or two of those is enough to convince everybody that that's an epidemic. But in general, it's a huge liability that a woman takes on. And again, I'm telling you what I've read. Of course, I'm a man, so I'm not speaking out of my own personal experience. But it's an enormous liability for a woman to make a claim like that, which is why most of them don't make a claim until it's much later and safer, or maybe never. Why a lot of these articles are written and there's pseudonyms used or anonymous reports, because it is a liability. And so the policy of believing these stories, especially not just, and there's levels of credence that you can give to these things. And again, good Bayesian reasoning will help us here. Like, what's the probabilities? If there's corroborating stories, if there are other eyewitnesses, this kind of improves the likelihood that things are true. And I think the knee-jerk response to defend our heroes and our mentors is natural, but also not very skeptical. And when I say that the David Silverman case, it messed me up for a week. And it still bothered. I went to look at my notes, to make my notes. I was like, when was that? And I went back to the BuzzFeed thing and the American Atheist announcement, and it was like 10 days ago. Like it feels like a month has gone by or more. Dave was a friend, and I've talked to individuals who are much closer, like Terry, much closer to Dave than I ever was, and it's devastating to people. The other thing, is that men can also fess up and say they're sorry and try to improve themselves. And that doesn't seem to be happening either, so. I think people are redeemable, but it's going to take some...
I've got a correction that I've just got to make.
Yes, please.
In the beginning, near the beginning of your talk, you said, and there's been a recurring theme, in the beginning of your talk you said something about there are just as many sexual abusers who are atheist as there are who are religious. I was in...
Maybe I did.
What's the question?
I did.
Okay, so let's say for the sake of argument that I said that.
I was in a professional development meeting in a school, and and you might want to look up statistics about sexual abuse. What is the question?
She's correcting something that I said.
It's not a question. I was in a professional development meeting in a school, and the principal, who is very religious, put up statistics about rapists and sexual abusers, sexual harassers, put those statistics up on the screen. And the very religious principal was quite shocked to see the statistics show that the vast majority of sexual molesters, sexual abusers are very religious.
Yeah, I don't know for sure, but I wouldn't be surprised.
That's what the statistics
Well,
say.
speaking of statistics, I mean, over 90% of people that are incarcerated identify with religion.
That too.
Let's take one more question.
I think, let me go with your question. You've had your hand up for a long time, and then we'll...
All right, we got one more question.
You are a humanist chaplain at a college, at USC. How much more important is it to have a humanist chaplain for our military? But from what I understand, the Congress has turned that down.
Yeah.
Is that true? And what are
the Navy, it's our friend Jace who's been trying to make headway on that.
Jason Torpy.
He was just denied by the military, and I think Congress had a role in that as well. I haven't followed it closely, but it is true that they denied that appeal to have a humanist chaplain. I think it's a matter of time that it'll happen. We have humanist chaplains in every other realm of society. But yeah, at this moment, that's been nixed.
Okay, if I could ask you, maybe just only take 30 seconds to come up.